Why does isolation call to you precisely when you try hardest to avoid it? What lies behind this silent impulse that pushes your soul away from the noise, as if something hidden is trying to speak only when no one else can hear? Perhaps you've already felt this strange sensation that something is stirring inside you, something that accepts no witnesses and only reveals itself when the door closes, when the world recedes, when even your own thoughts seem to echo in unknown chambers. What if this impulse weren't weakness but a signal, an inner calling you haven't yet learned to decipher? Some say that isolation is escape, discouragement, withdrawal. But what if this popular belief is inverted, completely disconnected from the profound reality that manifests itself in the oldest corners of the psyche? What if withdrawal is not collapse, but expansion? Jung suggested that consciousness expands like someone traversing a dark night, guided not by certainties, but by symbols that reveal themselves at the soul's own rhythm. Perhaps what you feel is not exhaustion, but the prelude to an internal movement that begins by breaking down the most rigid structures, those you thought were definitive. It's curious how the human mind tries to erase what it doesn't understand, creating quick explanations for phenomena that demand deep introspection. Have you ever noticed that the more you try to justify the reason for your withdrawal, the stranger it seems? As if there were something behind the justifications, something waiting to be noticed? That's where the unease lies, not in the isolation itself, but in the question it carries. And every time you try to ignore it, the call returns, more subtle, more provocative, like an echo coming from a place you recognize but can't name. Perhaps the true cause lies not on the surface of the behavior, but in the layers you've learned to hide, even from yourself. Jung said that certain inner phases manifest as silent invitations to cross, psychological boundaries that cannot be walked alongside anyone. And it is precisely during these periods that the soul begins to reorganize its own symbols, tearing down old facades and preparing the ground for a new state of consciousness. It is not withdrawal. It is gestation. It is not weakness. It is a passage that demands silence, but is not made of solitude. And that's why nothing you're experiencing is random. Isolation doesn't push you away from the world. It pulls you into a territory that was waiting to be revisited. Something inside you knows this movement is inevitable, and that resisting it means delaying the revelation that has already begun. The question is, are you ready to see what this calling truly brings? Because every second of this video will be a piece of this enigma, and if you miss any fragment, you might also lose the key that makes everything else finally make sense. The sensation begins as an almost imperceptible tug that reshapes the air around you, inviting you to look inward with an honesty you rarely dare to confront. Nothing explodes, nothing roars, but something stirs slowly in the depths of consciousness, like a whisper that insists on being acknowledged. Isolation emerges as a narrow corridor leading to forgotten parts of yourself, and each inward step seems to open space for something new to try to be born. There comes a moment when the external world loses its power, and the everyday noise no longer exerts the same dominance, as if everything around you dissolves into a light mist that gives way to your own inner presence. The mind tries to cling to old certainties, but they slip away like wet pages. The feeling of estrangement grows, but along with it comes a curious sense of direction, and you realize you are entering territories you haven't visited in a long time. On a deeper level, memories begin to reorganize themselves without warning, like fragments coming together to form a figure you never recognized before. This isn't nostalgia, but rather a kind of silent understanding that emerges effortlessly. Isolation transforms into an internal projection room, revealing images that tell stories you didn't know still influenced your steps. And consciousness begins to see patterns that were previously camouflaged. The intensity grows when forgotten emotions return, not like storms, but like a tide that washes over your feet, demanding attention. A new kind of lucidity begins to sprout, dismantling small illusions that sustained old versions of yourself. Isolation serves as a framework for these perceptions to gain clarity, and the initial discomfort transforms into an openness to recognizing how much you are maturing without realizing it. At the most intimate point of this movement, you feel something expanding within you with unexpected gentleness, like a light turning on in a dark room without hurting your eyes. Isolation no longer presents itself as distance, but as shelter for a consciousness that has grown too large to fit into old forms. A new understanding begins to pulsate, demanding space to exist. And you understand that this inner calling is, in fact, the beginning of a profound transition. The mind begins to reveal nuances that were previously hidden beneath the daily rush, as if isolation had removed a veil that blocked essential perceptions. Long dormant sensations return with their own form and texture, demanding recognition. Fragments of understanding emerge in small flashes that reorganize perception, and you feel that something internal has finally found the courage to emerge. Suddenly, thoughts that seem disconnected begin to align, forming a kind of emotional map that points in directions you had never considered. Isolation proves to be a silent catalyst that transforms chaos into clarity. Each reflection delves into a layer you didn't dare listen to before, and, in this dive, a new coherence emerges on the surface. Then an internal dialogue emerges, not expressed in words but in sensations, internal gestures, and almost intuitive perceptions. It's as if a part of you, observing everything from afar, finally comes closer to reveal truths kept hidden for years. Isolation provides space for this voice to find its way through, and the depth of this encounter alters something structural within you. In a more subtle movement, the soul seems to organize old tensions that occupied your days without you realizing it. Isolation acts as a neutral environment where emotions can move without fear of judgment. Feelings reposition themselves like pieces that finally fit together, and you understand that this process would never happen amidst the external noise. Gradually, a more refined perception takes hold, allowing you to see yourself with an honesty you previously avoided. Isolation no longer represents absence, but full presence, as if you were rediscovering layers that have always belonged to you. A serene stability begins to sprout in the center of your consciousness, and you recognize that you are going through a necessary stage of your growth. There comes a moment when inner silence ceases to feel empty and begins to behave like a fertile ground, where ideas and sensations sprout more freely. Isolation creates an opening to perceive details that previously went unnoticed. The mind becomes more receptive to what arises spontaneously, and you begin to notice patterns that were hidden beneath layers of emotional distraction. As introspection deepens the gaze, memories return with new meaning, as if asking to be reinterpreted from a more mature place. Emotions that once troubled you now reveal themselves as important messages about your own journey. Isolation allows these memories to find space, and in the process you discover that nothing returns without purpose. On another level of perception, a gentle lucidity emerges amidst ordinary thoughts, as if opening a crack through which one's true essence can breathe. Isolation provides sustenance for this silent expansion. The psyche begins to connect previously scattered dots, and the clarity that arises transforms old fears into understanding. As you observe these changes, you realize that parts of yourself that were frozen are finally finding movement. Isolation acts as a catalyst to release tensions you were carrying without realizing it. Lightness gradually settles in, like someone making room for a new internal cycle, and you understand that this flow doesn't depend on the external world. It originates from within. At the peak of this phase, the feeling is that you are crossing an inner portal that only opens when mind and soul are in agreement. Isolation acts as a guardian of this passage, ensuring that nothing interrupts the process. A new consciousness begins to pulse firmly, and you realize that you are approaching a deeper understanding of yourself. The deepening of this journey reveals an inner territory where everything seems clearer, as if old sensations have finally found light. Isolation acts as a lens that brings neglected emotions closer, allowing each one to be understood with more delicacy. Consciousness begins to recognize points that previously escaped it, and you realize that this moment is not about retreat but about reconstruction. A new layer of understanding emerges when you realize that certain anxieties weren't enemies, but rather silent signals, guides trying to direct you inward. Isolation provides the structure for this dialogue to be heard without interruption. The soul begins to reveal hidden intentions, and this inner movement leads you to unexpected clarity. At a certain point, previously heavy feelings begin to dissolve, as if consciousness were rearranging everything to make room for a new emotional state. Isolation provides the ideal setting for this purification to happen organically. Old tensions lose their power, and you notice that what remained of the chaos were only parts asking For reorganization, the depth of the process intensifies when intuitive perceptions begin to guide your thoughts more accurately than any logical reasoning. Isolation becomes a channel for these perceptions to flow without resistance. Intuition reveals itself as a legitimate source of guidance, and by following this silent path, you recognize routes you previously ignored. Finally, a different kind of serenity fills your presence, as if each layer traversed has freed up space for something more authentic to flourish. Isolation ceases to be a backdrop and becomes a tool for expansion. Consciousness settles on firmer ground, and you understand that you are transforming in a profound and inevitable way. A turning point emerges when you recognize that this inner journey is not only revealing new parts of yourself, but also dismantling old defenses that no longer serve who you are becoming. Isolation creates the perfect environment for this silent renewal. Perception extends to horizons that were previously impossible to see, and you feel that something in your inner structure has changed permanently. Another layer is revealed when you realize that initial unease has now transformed into an impulse for understanding, as if each emotional movement were asking not for escape, but for acceptance. Isolation allows this listening to be deep enough to integrate what was previously divided. The psyche finds a point of equilibrium between shadow and light, and you begin to walk with more authenticity. In an even more refined field, intuitions emerge that seem to spring from a space that doesn't depend on logic, but on an inner wisdom that has always awaited silence. Isolation protects this subtlety, preventing excessive stimuli from interrupting it. Consciousness expands organically, without forcing anything, and you understand that this process is preparing you for something greater. The transition gains momentum when old patterns finally give way, making room for new ways of being that arrive lightly yet firmly enough to take root. Isolation acts as a bridge for this new identity to stabilize. Emotions find healthier places to live, and the resulting clarity broadens your understanding of your own journey. At the end of this block, a feeling of complete presence takes hold of you, as if each insight, each silence, each rearranged fragment had built a new inner foundation. Isolation reveals its true role as a path of expansion, not contraction. Consciousness shows itself ready for the next step, and you realize that something essential is about to be revealed. At the moment when this entire inner journey converges, something barely visible, yet impossible to ignore, begins to pulsate within you, as if each symbol, each silence, and each fragment rearranged along the way finally reveals its true purpose. There is no rupture here, only continuity, like the echo that lingers after the last word spoken in an ancient corridor. Perception expands almost imperceptibly and at the same time profoundly, making it clear that isolation was never absence. It was the ground where your consciousness prepared space to be reborn, and in this silent emergence, you realize that you have crossed a frontier from which there is no return. At this elevated point, what once seemed empty transforms into revelation, like a discrete light illuminating precisely what you've avoided for so long. The entire journey reconfigures itself within you, not as a memory, but as a living understanding that breathes on its own. Tensions dissolve into clarity, and the weight of questions becomes an opening for new answers that are not yet formed. The journey leaves marks that don't scratch, marks that expand, that open, that liberate. And upon realizing this, a kind of deeper breath arises effortlessly, as if the soul had finally found the rhythm it always sought. Amidst this new presence, certain inner truths begin to speak more clearly, inviting you to see the world not with old eyes, but with eyes born from this silent expansion. Everything that seemed to be on the outside now reveals a soft mirror, reflecting parts of yourself that were kept hidden and waiting for the right moment to emerge. And you understand that the transformation didn't happen on the surface. It happened at the roots, in the layer that sustains everything you think, feel, and choose. It is in this profound perception that isolation reveals itself as a bridge, not as a destination. The depth of this awareness creates a space for contemplation where every gesture in the world seems laden with meaning, as if your entire life were aligned so that you could understand this exact moment. There is no rush within this state, only presence, a presence that recognizes its own strength without needing to announce it. You feel something awakened within you, guiding your future decisions with greater integrity and sensitivity. And, in this complete silence, the final question germinates. What else can flourish when you allow the soul to speak without interruption? And then comes the symbolic message, the one that needs no explanation because it touches directly where language cannot reach. Isolation never distanced you from the world. It only brought you closer to the part that is finally ready to exist. This is the spark that ignites what was still hidden, the meeting point between everything that has been revealed and everything that is yet to come. If this video touched you in a way you can't name, allow it to continue living within you. Like, share, comment on what it awakened in you, and subscribe to walk with me on this journey of expansion. Not because someone asked, but because something inside you recognized that it's the next step.